My best friend wanted to attack me and get rid of me because he has had feelings for my girlfriend for 5 years. I'm 27, and my best friend Mark, 26, and I have been inseparable since we were 16. What initially brought us together was our shared dream of pursuing the same career. For years, we both struggled, facing rejection after rejection. But over the past year, things have finally started looking up for me. My career is gaining momentum, while Mark's, unfortunately, has not. Throughout this time, I've done everything I could to support him, encouraging him, offering advice, and trying to lift him up. We even lived together as roommates from ages 20 to 23, sharing everything. But about 6 months ago, something shifted. Mark's attitude toward me took a turn for the worse. He started turning me into the punchline of his jokes, making belittling and condescending remarks. I've always been the type to let things roll off my back, a happy-go-lucky kind of guy. So, at first, I didn't take it too seriously. I figured he was just going through a rough time, struggling with frustration. I get it, it's brutal trying to break into this industry, and it must have been hard for him to watch me achieve the success we both dreamed of. Then there's my ex-girlfriend, Emily, 26. For 5.5 years, I thought our relationship was perfect. We had great communication, a solid connection, and an amazing sex life. She had been by my side through all the ups and downs of my career struggles, always supporting me. I tend to be an open book, and I shared everything with her. No secrets, complete honesty. I made an effort to keep our relationship fresh and exciting, planning date nights at least once or twice a week, surprising her with little gifts, organizing trips, and finding new experiences we could enjoy together, cooking classes, dance lessons, whatever we could do to have fun. I fully indulged in her hobbies, making sure she knew she was my priority. And I truly believed she felt the same way. Even as my career started taking off, I never let it overshadow my time with her or my friends. Maintaining a balance between work and my personal life has always been important to me. Last week, we were all hanging out at our friends Tom and Katie's place. They recently bought a house and had invited us over. Our usual crew was there, Bill, 26, and Jane, 27. We've all been friends for 7 years, so it was supposed to be a fun, relaxed night. We were sitting in the yard, drinking, and Mark was getting drunk fast. The entire evening, he kept taking shots at me. Sarcastic comments, little digs, the usual passive-aggressive nonsense I had been putting up with for months. But after 6 months of this, I'd finally had enough. I called him out on it, and things escalated into a full-blown argument. In the heat of the moment, I told him I believed his resentment stemmed from jealousy over my success, and that it wasn't my fault he hadn't made it. I even pointed out everything I had done to help him, try to open doors for him, only for him to constantly push back. That must have been the final straw for him because, without warning, he lunged at me. We shoved each other, and then he knocked me down. Before I could react, he kicked me in the ribs multiple times. And then, he tried to stomp on my head. I was lucky his foot slipped off my cheek instead of hitting full force, though the impact was still enough to leave my face swollen. He went for another stomp, but I managed to move in time, and I saw his foot land just inches from my head. If he had made contact, he could have cracked my skull, or worse, killed me. That's when the others stepped in. As I scrambled to my feet, I shouted at him, asking if he was out of his damn mind. He looked like he was about to leave, but instead, he picked up a wooden plank. Tom and Katie had been redoing their fence and building shed in the yard. Before anyone could stop him, he swung it straight at my head. I barely managed to duck and raise my arm, so instead of my skull, he slammed it into my elbow hard. Once again, in just a few seconds, he nearly killed me. And then, complete chaos erupted. His wild swing had almost hit Jane, too. That's when Tom and Bill lost it. Seeing red, they tackled Mark and beat the hell out of him. The girls eventually managed to pull them off, and once the initial adrenaline rush faded, we were all left standing there, completely shocked at what had just happened. Mark sat up, his face covered in blood, though he hadn't lost consciousness. And then, to my disbelief, Emily went and sat next to him. Katie ended up driving him to the hospital, while the rest of us were left in stunned silence. The morning after, Mark woke up with a broken nose and a mild concussion. She dropped him off at his parents' house, but according to her, Mark barely spoke a word. He didn't try to explain himself or even apologize. None of us got much sleep that night, and honestly, things became a blur after that. It was probably a mix of alcohol, shock, adrenaline, and the fact that it was the worst night of my life. But somehow, things managed to spiral even further. You might have noticed I haven't mentioned Emily in a while. Well, we were all sitting around when Tom made a comment, something along the lines of how Mark deserved a lot worse than just a broken nose after trying to kill him. Twice, and nearly hurting Jane. That's when Emily, who had been sitting silently up until then, suddenly snapped. She jumped to Mark's defense, saying he didn't deserve any of this, and that he had just been going through a rough time. In an instant, she and Tom were at each other's throats, the argument escalating into a near screaming match before Emily finally stormed off. I followed her, figuring we were all exhausted, overwhelmed, and not thinking straight. My plan was to comfort her, to remind her that we were in shock and should probably just get some rest. But when I found her in the guest room, she was crying. I told her I understood how she felt, that we were all dealing with a lot, and maybe some sleep would help. She didn't even acknowledge me. And then, like a slow, creeping realization, it hit me. Emily had been sitting next to Mark the entire previous evening. Not when he first started screaming at me, but later. She was the one tugging at his arm, begging him to take a walk and calm down. Not for my sake, for his. Even after Mark had kicked me, stomped on me, and swung a plank at my head, her priority had been making sure he calmed down. While I was lying there, trying to process the pain, she never once checked on me. When the guys finally stepped in and started beating Mark, she was screaming hysterically, not for me, but for him, desperately trying to pull them off. And at no point that entire night could I recall her asking me if I was okay. Not once. So I asked her, straight out, "Are you cheating on me with Mark?" And she just broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, repeating over and over that she never meant for things to go this far. That was all I needed to hear. My answer was right there, and I lost it. I started yelling, demanding to know what was going on, how she could do this to me. The commotion brought everyone else into the room, and the guys ended up pulling me away and trying to calm me down. Meanwhile, Jane and Katie took Emily to her parents' house, with Jane deciding to stay with her. Apparently, Emily cried so hard during the car ride that she couldn't even form words. By the time they got to her parents' place, she was such a wreck that Jane and Emily's dad had to physically help her upstairs and into bed. She could barely stand. The only thing she managed to say or scream, according to them, was that she had ruined everything. Jane stayed because Emily's parents were worried sick. They'd never seen her in a state like this before. When Jane and Katie told them what had happened, about Mark, about me, about everything, it became clear that this mess had all stemmed from an affair between Mark and Emily. The next 5 days were hell. I was in constant pain, both physically and emotionally. My elbow had a fracture, my ribs were bruised, and the right side of my face was swollen. The events of that night played on an endless loop in my head. I sent Emily a few texts, hoping for an explanation, but she never responded. Then, this morning, I got a call from my former mother-in-law. My in-laws had always been amazing people, kind, supportive, and genuinely good to me. She was incredibly apologetic about what had happened and said she understood how I felt. Then she told me that Emily wanted to see me, to talk, and asked if I would be willing to come over. After everything, I agreed. When I arrived, they told me they would give us space and waited outside in their car. But given the state Emily was in, they didn't want to leave entirely. And when I walked inside and saw her, it was like a tidal wave of emotions crashing down on me. Anger, resentment, bitterness. But then, unexpectedly, pity. She looked awful, like she hadn't eaten, showered, or slept in days. Like someone on the verge of a complete breakdown. And as much as I hated what she did, for a moment, I just wanted to hold her, to make it better. But I held myself back and just sat down across from her. She told me I could ask her anything, that she would be completely honest. Over and over, she kept saying how sorry she was, how she had destroyed everything and ruined everyone's lives. I won't go into every detail because this is already long enough, but in short, about a year ago, Mark confessed his feelings for Emily. From that moment on, he had been relentless. She insisted she never felt the same way and had made that clear to him. But when I asked why she never told me about it, she said she didn't want to ruin our friendship. She thought she could handle it on her own. Then, in the past few months, Mark had become more aggressive, pushing harder, telling her to leave me for him. I asked if anything physical had happened, and she admitted that they had kissed twice, both times initiated by Mark, but she had stopped it. There was also one time they cuddled while watching a movie, but when Mark tried to take things further, she left and set firm boundaries. I asked her point blank, if she knew he kept pushing, why did she continue spending time alone with him? If she had to keep shutting him down, why did she still answer his messages, meet up with him, and give him hope? Was it because she liked the attention? And then she said the strangest thing. She felt bad for him. She felt sorry for him. The next morning, Mark had a broken nose and a mild concussion. She dropped him off at his parents' house, saying he barely spoke, didn't explain himself, and never apologized. None of us got much sleep that night, and honestly, everything after that is a blur, probably a mix of alcohol, shock, adrenaline, and the worst night of my life. But somehow it still got worse. You might have noticed I haven't mentioned Emily in a while. We were all sitting around when Tom muttered that Mark deserved worse than a broken nose for trying to kill him. Twice, and almost hurting Jane. That's when Emily, who had been silent up until now, suddenly snapped. She defended Mark, saying he didn't deserve any of this, that he was just going through a rough time. Tom and Emily nearly ended up screaming at each other before she stormed off. I followed her, thinking we were all in shock and exhausted, and I wanted to comfort her. But when I found her crying in the guest room, something clicked. I told her I understood, that we were all overwhelmed, and maybe we just needed to sleep. But she didn't even look at me. That's when it hit me. Mark and Emily had been sitting next to each other the night before. Not just that, but when Mark was screaming at me, she was the one tugging at his arm, pleading with him to calm down. Not for my sake, but for his. After he kicked me, stomped on me, and swung a plank at me, she was still focused on him. She never once checked on me. And when the guys were beating Mark, she was the one screaming hysterically, trying to pull them off him. The whole night, I don't remember her asking me even once if I was okay. So I asked her, "Are you cheating on me with Mark?" She just broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, repeating that she never meant for it to go this far. That was my answer. I lost it. I started yelling, demanding to know what the hell was going on and how she could do this to me. The others rushed in, and the guys pulled me into another room to calm me down. Meanwhile, Jane and Katie drove Emily to her parents' house. Jane ended up staying with her because Emily was a complete wreck, crying so hard she couldn't even speak. When they got to her parents' house, her dad and Jane had to help her upstairs because she was barely able to stand. All she kept screaming over and over was that she had ruined everything. Jane and Katie told her parents what had happened, about Mark, about me, and how it all seemed to stem from Mark and Emily's affair. 5 days passed. I was drowning in physical and emotional pain, angry, confused. My elbow was fractured, my ribs were bruised, and the right side of my face was still swollen. That night kept replaying in my head on a loop. I sent Emily some texts, asking for an explanation, but she never responded. Then, this morning, my former mother-in-law called. She and her husband had always been good to me, kind and supportive. She apologized for her daughter, said she understood what I was going through, then asked if I could come over. Emily wanted to talk. I agreed. When I arrived, they told me they'd wait outside in the car to give us space, but they didn't want to leave entirely because of the state Emily was in. When I walked in and saw her, it was like a roller coaster of emotions. Anger, bitterness, and then, to my own surprise, pity. She looked awful, like she hadn't eaten, showered, or slept since that night. She looked like a shell of herself. A part of me wanted to run over and hold her, but I forced myself to sit down across from her instead. She told me I could ask her anything and promised to be honest. She kept repeating how sorry she was, saying she had ruined everything. I won't go into too many details because this is already long, but she told me that Mark had confessed his love for her a year ago and had been persistent ever since. She said she never reciprocated and made it clear she wasn't interested. I asked why she never told me. She said she didn't want to ruin our friendship and thought she could handle it on her own. Then, over the last few months, he had become more aggressive, pushing her to leave me for him. I asked if anything physical had happened. She admitted they kissed twice, both times initiated by Mark, and both times she stopped it. She said they cuddled once while watching a movie, but when he tried to take it further, she left and set clear boundaries. I asked why she kept seeing him alone if he was constantly crossing the line. She said he always promised he wouldn't do it again. I asked why she didn't cut contact, why she kept responding to his messages, meeting him, giving him false hope. Did she like the attention? Then she said something that made my stomach turn. She said she felt sorry for him, protective of him, like she was his big sister. What the hell? She even set him up on a date with one of her friends, except he sabotaged it by being a complete asshole to the girl. I asked if she even realized how much she had strung him along. She started crying, insisting she had only wanted to help him, to fix things, that she had been stupid and made everything worse. Then I asked her the big question, have you had any contact with him since that night? She froze, and then she started sobbing. That completely broke me. This man had tried for over a year to steal her from me. He tried to kill me. And after 5 days of complete silence, where she couldn't even text me back, she was still talking to him? I couldn't even speak. I just stood up, ready to walk out. She panicked, pleading with me to listen, offering to show me their messages. She said she only checked in to see if he was okay, and that the conversation ended with her telling him it was over, that he needed to stop contacting her. But for me, the damage was done. I had spent the worst 5 days of my life alone, drowning in pain because of the two of them, and she still chose to keep in touch with him. I walked out, with her chasing after me, begging me not to leave. I'm not proud of this, but when her parents got out of the car to ask if everything was okay, I snapped. I turned to them and yelled that their sorry excuse of a daughter had ruined my life, that she chose the man who tried to stomp my face and over me. I was so angry I couldn't even drive. I just started walking, not even sure where I was going. At some point, my ex-father-in-law pulled up next to me and told me to get in. I did, expecting him to yell at me, to tell me off. But he didn't. He just drove me home in silence. Before I got out, he placed a hand on my shoulder. I couldn't even look at him. Later, Emily sent me screenshots of their texts. According to them, she really had just checked in on him and then told him to never contact her again. She also sent past messages where she rejected him, told him she didn't have feelings for him. But they had been talking for over a year. She could have easily cherry-picked what to show me, leaving out the things that didn't paint her in a good light. I haven't responded. I don't think I ever will. I should just block her. But for some reason, I can't. Not yet. Now I'm just here, trying to get all of this out of my system. I feel so betrayed, so angry. I want Emily and Mark to hurt, not physically, but emotionally. I want them to feel what I'm feeling. And I know that's not healthy. I just don't know where to go from here. How do you even begin to move on from something like this? How do I stop thinking about it? How do I start living again? A lot of people have been asking for an update, so I'll do my best to provide one. However, if I go into too much detail, this will end up way too long. The main issue I need advice on is in the later paragraphs, but before I get there, I need to lay everything out. Apologies for the length. I didn't intend for it to be this long, but once I started writing, I just had to get everything off my chest. Mark, everyone has told me to press charges against him. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe a lot of you are from the US, where people put too much faith in the justice system, or perhaps you've watched too many legal dramas where everything wraps up neatly. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way here. I consulted 2 different lawyers, and while I could press charges, the odds of him actually ending up in jail are slim to none. Most likely, he'd just have to cover court fees and pay me his settlement, which could be a significant amount or something relatively minor since I didn't sustain any severe or lasting injuries. My friends could testify about how serious his assault was, but ultimately, the judge would base their ruling on the actual damage done. At worst, he might end up with probation, but jail time is highly unlikely. Sure, I could hurt him financially, but that would open the door for him to retaliate against Tom and Bill. And truthfully, they might end up worse off than Mark would. They broke his nose and gave him a concussion, which means a good lawyer could argue that he has lasting physical effects from the incident. This could drag out for months, possibly even years. And honestly, I just want to move on. His reputation has already taken a hit. He's lost some friends, though a few have chosen to stay neutral. His older brother told me that both he and their parents are deeply disappointed in Mark, though they aren't cutting ties with him. However, his younger sister took it especially hard. She used to joke about seeing me as an older brother, always at Mark's expense, but in a light-hearted way. She also really admired Emily, so this whole thing devastated her, and she's completely cut Mark off. Mark did send me a long apology letter, but he never once mentioned Emily. He only acknowledged how he treated me and the assault itself. It was a genuine apology, but it lacked any real depth. It was like he was taking responsibility while also blaming his mental health for his actions. I haven't responded and don't plan to. Now about Jane and Katie. Some of you caught my comment where I mentioned that they hinted at Mark possibly being abusive toward Emily. That made me suspect they knew more than they initially let on or were choosing to stand by her. So, I played dumb. I acted like I was shocked I didn't notice any warning signs and asked if they had seen anything. They admitted that they knew Mark had kissed Emily, but claimed they weren't aware of the full extent of it. Supposedly, Emily told them he kissed her, but she handled it herself. I didn't buy it. When I pushed Jane for more details, she got defensive. That reaction alone told me she wasn't being completely honest. That, in turn, caused a chain reaction. Tom got angry at her for keeping secrets. In his mind, if she could hide something like this, what else might she be keeping from him? Their relationship has been strained ever since. I told Tom not to be mad at her on my behalf, but I stayed out of the rest. Katie, on the other hand, came over to my place and asked to talk. She seemed genuinely remorseful. She insisted that she really didn't know much. She had just overheard part of conversation about the kiss and later asked Jane about it. But Jane and Emily had downplayed the whole thing. She thought it was something Emily had already told me about, so she never brought it up. I believe her. She seemed sincere, unlike Jane. I don't hate Jane, and I don't resent her, but I am disappointed. Because of that, I've kept my distance from her these past few weeks. Low contact, maybe even no contact at times. I just don't feel like being around her, and that's slightly affected my friendship with Tom since I've been hanging out with other people instead. And then there's Emily. A lot of you suggested that I cut contact completely, but I know myself. If I had just walked away without getting everything off my chest, it would have driven me insane. I needed closure. Someone messaged me saying they were raised to confront problems directly rather than avoid them, and that resonated with me more than the idea of going no contact. That was my plan: meet with her one last time, say what I needed to say, and then cut her off for good. I also had to apologize to her parents and pick up my car since it was still at their place. So, for days after everything went down, I called them up. I asked if I could stop by, have a conversation with them, and if they were willing to speak with Emily. Emily, again, they seemed almost relieved. Part of me feels like they thought I might actually forgive her, or that I was planning to. So, I went over there and we had a conversation. I apologized, and they told me they were shocked and disappointed by the things I had yelled. But they said they understood I was in a really bad place and dealing with a lot of emotions. After that, we hugged. Then they stepped outside again, and I went into the living room, where Emily was waiting for me. She walked toward me, looking like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, with the saddest expression I've ever seen. She asked me for a hug, but I refused and told her to sit down. We needed to talk. I asked her to tell me everything again, to be completely honest. I wanted to know if Mark had ever been abusive in any way, like Jane and Katie had suggested. She told me the same version as before, but this time with some added details. She explained that she hadn't fully understood at the time. She thought it was her responsibility to fix the situation. The reason she couldn't come clean about everything was because of Mark. He had threatened her, telling her he'd go straight to me and confess everything. That they kissed, that they were in love, and that she was cheating on me. When she tried to cut ties with him, he said that if she did, it would ruin our relationship and even the friendship between me and him. He made her feel like I would believe his words over hers. That's why she felt trapped, like she had no choice but to deal with it on her own. I asked her again if he had ever been physically abusive, and after a hesitation, she said, not really. But then she told me about 2 incidents where he hurt her. Not severely, but enough for it to cause pain. One time, an event we were all at, he pulled her aside and asked if she really didn't love him. She said no and tried to walk away, but he grabbed her wrists and wouldn't let go. He pulled her toward him, hurting her wrists in the process. I remembered that night clearly. Halfway through, Emily had gone quiet, but she told me it was because she was tired. The second time was similar. They were alone, and he grabbed her bicep and squeezed hard enough to leave bruises. I never noticed any bruises on her, though. If there had been any, I like to think I would have asked her about them. Maybe she hid them from me. I also asked if there was ever any sexual involvement between them, if his intentions were clear. She insisted that nothing sexual had happened and that she didn't know why she kept putting herself in that position with him. She just kept saying she was being stupid. I pushed further, asking her why Mark had so much power over her that for an entire year, she couldn't find the strength to come to me with the truth. She told me again she didn't know. She just kept making mistakes, and I couldn't get through to her. I asked her why, after Mark had attacked me. She chose to ignore me, but not him. She broke down in tears and kept saying she didn't know why. She thought our relationship was strong enough to bounce back from anything, but she was also worried about what Mark would do. I told her that was the thing that hurt me the most, that she was more concerned about him than she was about me. To me, it felt like she had chosen him. She denied it, but I stood firm. It felt like she had. I then explained just how much they had hurt me. All the trust was gone, and I told her it was over. I would no longer have contact with her. She asked if there was ever a chance we could be in each other's lives again, and I told her no. But even though I said that, I was torn inside. There were so many things I doubted about her story. So, I reached out to Sarah, Emily's best friend, hoping for some clarity. I just felt destroyed, and like nobody around me was being truthful. I begged Sarah to be honest with me. To my surprise, she answered. It turns out she knew a lot more than I thought. Emily had kept her out of the loop on many things. Sarah knew about Mark, and had even told Emily to stop talking to him and tell me about his behavior. She knew they had kissed, and that Emily regretted it. Emily was the one who put a stop to things before it could go further. Sarah told me that, from the beginning, Emily had felt validated by Mark's attention. She liked the dynamic in our relationship when I needed her support, especially when my career was struggling and full of rejections. It seemed like I was always crying on her shoulder or relying on her for support, but the truth is there were many times when she was my rock. She was the one who cheered me up, hugged me, cuddled with me, motivated me, and made me believe in myself when I needed it most. She helped me keep going, especially when my career seemed like it was going nowhere. And when my career finally took off, she felt like that dynamic had shifted. Mark had taken the position I once held, and she was able to give him the support she had given me, which made her feel validated again. I just couldn't believe it. Sarah said she saw it too, and that's when she told me how Emily had been feeling. I asked her if she thought Emily had been feeling validated by the sexual attraction from Mark, and Sarah said Emily never really talked about it. But knowing Emily for 20 years, she suspected it was a part of it. Then, as I had feared, I asked if I had been delusional in thinking I was a good boyfriend. Maybe I had done something that pushed her into Mark's arms? Sarah told me that Emily never really talked badly about me. She always sounded in love and constantly spoke about how happy I made her, to the point where Sarah had even felt jealous at times. But Emily did say I was sometimes overbearing and clingy, and I could be selfish at times, shutting down when things got tough. But that was really the worst of it. Since then, I've started to think Sarah might have been flirting with me. She texts me every day now, at first just asking how my day went or how I was feeling. Then it turned into memes, and eventually, some of them were a bit sexual. I have no interest in her in that way, though, so I guess I'm going to have to shut it down before she thinks I'm leading her on. I'm just trying to process everything, try to move on. Then about 8 or 9 days ago, I get a text from Emily. I had blocked her on all apps and social media. We always communicated there, but rarely by phone, so it completely slipped my mind to block her number. Or maybe subconsciously I didn't want to. The text just said, "How have you been?" And then she followed it up with, "I smiled and laughed again for the first time because of you," along with a picture of me on her TV. She said she was proud of me and looked forward to seeing my career progress. I work in the entertainment industry, and my big break came early last year when I got a job behind the scenes, which eventually led to me getting in front of the camera. I'm by no means famous, but my show is gaining an audience, even if it's not on the main channel. I made the mistake of responding, and we chatted for 2 days, not about us, but about some political issues going on. I still kept my distance, though. If she texted me, I'd wait until I was in the right headspace to reply, or until I had finished what I was doing. Then she asked if I could ever find it in my heart to let her back into my life, even in a small way, in the future. I told her I needed more time, but that it was unlikely. I couldn't keep doing this for my mental health. I said goodbye and blocked her again. I thought that was the end of it. But last Friday night, around midnight, I get a knock on my door. I open it, and there she is, soaked to the bone, standing in the rain like something out of a movie. I asked her what the hell she was doing here, and she said she'd been out drinking and wanted to see me. But as soon as she left the taxi, she got cold feet. She stood by the road for about 10 minutes, but it was too cold to wait for another cab. So I let her in. I gave her some old sweatpants, a t-shirt, and a hoodie, and a bag to put her wet clothes in. She told me her girlfriends had peer pressured her into going out for a girls' night, but she hadn't felt ready. She went anyway, and while they were drinking, she got her favorite cocktail, the one we used to drink together. We had this tradition where we'd text each other all night, sending funny things that happened, inside jokes or pictures of our drinks, whichever one was fancier. We were that annoying couple, always on our phones, talking when we were apart. She said she instinctively reached for her phone to send me a picture, but then remembered she couldn't do that anymore, and a wave of sadness washed over her. She drank some more, and after telling her friends she didn't want to meet or talk to any men, they invited some guys over. One of them flirted with her, trying to get her attention, and her friends kept leaving them alone together. She said she'd had enough. The guy was boring, uninteresting, pathetic, and honestly ugly. Emily rarely speaks like this about people, which brings me to the point I'm at now. I know sober Emily, tipsy drunk Emily, and even drunk Emily. That night, she seemed to be in the tipsy drunk stage, but she was nothing like her usual self. Normally, she's giggly, bubbly, and full of energy, but now she was cold, distant, and refused to look me in the eye. It was nothing like the Emily I used to know. The last time I saw her, she looked at me with such sorrow and regret, and now it felt like she was a different person entirely. She almost spoke in a monotone, like she was completely detached. It threw me off, and I just couldn't wrap my head around it. I was tired, disoriented, and honestly so weirded out that my mind went blank. She just sat there, not saying a word. I went ahead and ordered her another taxi through the app, but after 15 minutes, it still said it was searching for one. Frustrated, I decided to just drive her home myself. I didn't think it was a good idea for her to stay over, and I suspected that might have been her intention all along, trying to call my bluff. She didn't argue, though, just grabbed her things and followed me to the car, silent as ever. The mood in the car was still off. She asked if she could choose the music, and I said yes. Then she asked if she could hold my hand while we drove, just for one last time. Stupidly, I said yes, but then she just sat there, staring out the window, never once looking at me. Her attitude was disarming in a way I hadn't expected. My mind was still a blank slate. In a lame attempt to break the tension, I joked about driving her back to her friends. It felt almost pathetic. She just shrugged and said she was done with men forever. All they ever did was abuse her trust, manipulate her emotions, and take advantage of her kindness, putting her in one bad situation after another. I wasn't sure if she was talking about me, Mark, or both, so I asked her why she said that. She shrugged again and said, "Seriously." Then she told me something that hit me hard. Mark had sent her a letter asking her to move with him to another country, but she said she'd thrown it out. That was it. The rest of the drive was in silence, and when we reached her parents' house, I felt her squeeze my hand like she didn't want to let go. I stopped the car, but she didn't say anything. She just got out and went inside, not even looking back at me. When I got home, of course, I found her underwear in my bathroom, not in a laundry basket, but right next to it where clothes sometimes fall. It's a place I know clothes often land, but this time it seemed too convenient. I couldn't help but wonder if she left them there on purpose, knowing I'd find them. Maybe it was another reason for us to see each other again, Another thing for me to overthink and doubt about. And now, I've got her underwear, and she's got my clothes. So, I guess we've both got a reason to see each other again. I was so confused, and honestly, I was a little scared for Emily. She was acting so unlike herself that night, and I even started wondering if she had been on something, drugs, maybe? She was just not the Emily I knew. I debated asking Sarah about it, but I didn't want to put her in that kind of position. I didn't want to pull a Mark on her. But then I did something stupid. I unblocked Emily on everything, thinking she might reach out with an apology for showing up at my place drunk. The old Emily would have done that, but when I looked at her social media, it was clear something had changed. She'd removed her bio and deleted almost every picture she had. Her Instagram feed, which used to be cute and quirky, was now down to just 2 old pictures of her. Everything else was gone. She had pictures with other people, and then pictures of me, except for one of the 2 of us together from a holiday 2 years ago. We'd both declared it the most fun time of our lives. I thought maybe I was making some small progress, but now I can't stop thinking about her again. The truth is, I miss Emily so much. She really is one of a kind, and I've always known how lucky I've been to have her in my life. As much as I've hated her and resented her this past month, seeing her on Friday, remembering how she cried at her parents' place, it hurt. I hated seeing her like that. For a while, I felt almost content thinking about her hurting from her own decisions, destroying her life with Mark. She deserved it for making me hurt so much, for the pain she caused. But now I just feel this worry. I'm afraid for her. I'm worried about her more than ever. I admit, when she squeezed my hand in the car, I felt this little tingle like butterflies in my stomach, thinking about it. Our time together, those moments, it all felt real. But then I feel worried. I don't want her to self-destruct, to carry guilt or regret for the rest of her life. We're all just human. We all make mistakes. Part of me believes Mark was abusive, and that makes me want to press charges to punish him for what he did to her. I think she felt stuck, trapped in this mess because of his threats and her fear of losing everything. But then again, she consoled him, not me, when everything came to a head. I keep going around in circles. I feel like her visit on Friday was a little manipulative, showing up soaking wet, leaving her underwear, acting all weird. But then for a few minutes, I feel like I don't care about that at all. I just want her in my life again as my partner. So here I am, thinking in circles. Should I go no contact and try to stay strong? Or should I reach out, have an honest talk with her, lay everything on the table, and see if we can work things out, move forward together? Or should I just be the bigger person, meet with her, and end things in a way that might relieve her of some of the guilt, so she won't beat herself up over this or regret her whole life? Maybe I'll lie or downplay things, just so I don't have to worry about her. As you can see, fellow Redditors, I'm so confused. I feel clueless right now, and I'm hoping that, like last time, someone can offer advice that will help me see the right way forward.